Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
We begin in Washington, where Congress has kept the lights on again.
I'm happy to inform the American people there will be no government shutdown on Friday.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer is celebrating after the Senate passed a temporary spending bill last night that keeps some parts of the government open until March 8th and the rest through March 22nd. Bloomberg's Eric Wasson has more details from Washington.
Behind the scenes, there's also sort of an agreement on a six-bill package, full-year funding for about 27% of agency spending. We're expecting to see that released sometime this weekend, probably on Sunday.
Bloomberg's Eric Wasson reports Republicans in the House have been told not to expect many victories when those details come out. The temporary spending bill is now headed to the White House, where President Biden plans to sign it.
Well, Nathan, turning to presidential politics, the border is quickly replacing the economy as the most important issues for American voters. And Bloomberg's Ed Baxter reports the frontrunners are paying attention.
Both President Joe Biden and Donald Trump visiting the border, two different locations and both blaming each other. Trump at Eagles Pass.
People from places unknown, from countries unknown, who don't speak languages. We have languages coming into our country. We have nobody that even speaks those languages. They're truly foreign languages. Nobody speaks them.
Biden at Brownsville.
Folks, on my first day as president, I introduced a bill I sent to Congress, a comprehensive plan to fix the broken immigration system and to secure the border. But no action was taken.
Trump calling it a Biden invasion. Biden saying the Congress and Republicans must act. Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Ed, thank you. Now we turn to the markets where stocks begin the new month at record highs. We get more from Bloomberg's John Tucker. John?
And Nathan, the S&P 500, the NASDAQ, and the NASDAQ 100 all ended Thursday's session at records. In fact, the S&P 500 saw its 14th record this year. The NASDAQ 100 climbed almost 1%, with NVIDIA leading gains in mega caps. Investors also encouraged that the latest inflation data was not as hot as some expected. Lauren Sanfilippo at Merrill and Bank of America Private Bank thinks stocks can move higher from here.
There's a lot of things to look forward to, right? We have this Fed pivot that's being priced in. Growth is certainly surprising to the upside. The Fed Atlanta tracker for GDP for this quarter, 3.2%. So again, surprises to the upside will certainly matter and I think carry the market through this year.
Aside from economic data, the 489 companies in the S&P 500 that have reported earnings so far this season, 76% have delivered positive earnings surprises. Year to date, the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ are up around 7%. John Tucker, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, John, thanks. So one stock participating in the rally is Dell. Shares surging 22%. The computer hardware company reported fourth quarter results that beat expectations. Analysts say demand for artificial intelligence servers is driving momentum.
Well, on the flip side, Karen, shares of New York Community Bank Corp are down more than 27%. The commercial real estate lender took a $2.4 billion hit to earnings as it identified weaknesses with its loan review process. Details from Bloomberg's Charlie Pellet.
The bank also said it needs more time to file its annual report to regulators as it shores up its internal controls. In a separate filing, NYCB said, quote, management identified material weaknesses in the company's internal controls related to internal loan review, resulting from ineffective oversight, risk management, and monitoring activities. The announcement reignites a drama that erupted at the end of January when the bank slashed its dividend and stockpiled cash to cover troubled loans. In New York, Charlie Pellet, Bloomberg Radio.
And Charlie, the bank's also changing bosses. Alessandro Dinelli will become chief executive officer effective immediately, succeeding Thomas Kangemi.
Well, Nathan, while equities overall sit at record highs, it's also been quite a run for Bitcoin. The cryptocurrency is up more than 42% this year. Demand for the token from new U.S. exchange-traded funds is helping fuel the rally, which saw Bitcoin surge to over $63,000 earlier this week. But Michael Novogratz, the CEO of Galaxy Digital Holdings, expects a pullback in the near term.
I would say we've gotten to very frothy levels. And so I wouldn't be surprised to see some correction and some consolidation. But I'm very loath to pick a Bitcoin high because I really do believe this is price discovery.
And Galaxy Digital CEO Michael Novogratz says Bitcoin could pull back to the mid-50,000 level before rallying to new highs. Looking at Bitcoin right now, it's at about $62,100.
Turning to the economy, Karen, despite the Fed's preferred measure of inflation rising at its fastest pace in nearly a year, more central bankers are talking about rate cuts. San Francisco Fed President Mary Daly says policymakers are ready to take action.
We want to avoid holding on all the way to 2%, putting policy very tight, and then cause an unnecessary downturn. We are agile, and we're sitting in what I call the ready position. We are ready to make moves and adjust as the data demand us to do. And I think right now the economy and policy are in a good place to do that.
San Francisco Fed Chief Mary Daly added she's looking for, quote, a collage of evidence that inflation is moving sustainably lower. Daly spoke with David Weston on Bloomberg Wall Street Week. Catch the full conversation today at 6 p.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg Radio and television.
Well, Nathan, over in Europe, big changes are coming at the Swiss National Bank. Thomas Jordan is leaving the SNB later this year after more than a decade as president. It ends an era where his institution was at the heart of currency and banking turmoil that rippled around the world. Jordan is one of Switzerland's best known and most influential public officials. He steered the economy through the euro area debt crisis, removed the cap on the franc in 2015, and adopted the world's lowest interest rate.
Moving to Asia, Karen, manufacturing activity in China slumped in February as factories wrestled with weak demand. Bloomberg Daybreak Asia anchor Brian Curtis has more from Hong Kong.
China's factory activity shrank for a fifth month. The official PMI coming in at 49.1, slightly better than expected, but still in contraction. The Caixin PMI came in stronger at 50.9. Surveys elsewhere in Asia showed manufacturers cutting output and new orders last month. That's due to subdued customer spending in both domestic and international markets. Taiwan's PMI edging down to 48.6, Japan's at 47.2. In Hong Kong, Brian Curtis, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Brian, thanks. So Bloomberg News has learned the World Trade Organization has made progress toward agreements on measures to broaden global trade. Sources say a final deal on agriculture subsidies, overfishing, and tariff-free e-commerce are hinging on the willingness of major economies to make last-minute concessions.
Time now to take a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. And for that, we are joined by Bloomberg's Michael Barr. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Nathan. There are conflicting reports about yesterday's events leading up to the deaths of more than 100 Palestinians. According to health officials in northern Gaza, witnesses say Israeli soldiers guarding an aid convoy in Gaza City opened fire on Palestinians racing to pull food off the trucks. Israel says many of the victims were run over by the trucks and that troops only opened fire when they felt endangered by the crowd. IDF spokesman Peter Lerner.
A large amount of people were going on the trucks and looting them and trampling and crushing one another. And indeed, many of the people that were injured or wounded or even killed were as a result of the truck movement.
At a Pentagon briefing, Press Secretary Air Force Major General Pat Ryder says the Defense Department has repeatedly stressed to Israel the need to minimize civilian casualties.
We're going to continue to work with partners in the region to try to ensure that humanitarian assistance can be delivered, while at the same time communicating with our Israeli partners the importance of taking civilian safety into account.
Major General Ryder says the White House is asking for an investigation. Relatives and supporters of Alexei Navalny are bidding farewell to the Russian opposition leader today. The funeral is in southeastern Moscow after his still unexplained death in an Arctic penal colony. The first MTA public hearing was held last night on congestion pricing in Manhattan. There were comments for and against the move to toll drivers who travel below 60th Street. The hearing is not expected to change much, but it was a chance for voices to be heard. Many Uber and Lyft drivers are against the measure. This man, who identified himself as a TLC driver, says the MTA is a money pit, and he made sure the board knew he was in the no column.
For each and every one of you, there is a special place in hell for you. Lucifer waits for you. He waits for you.
Then he was escorted out. However, there were others for congestion pricing, like this woman who lost her husband and says an ambulance was delayed because of traffic.
None of you want to be in a situation where you might have been saved, but you died because there was too much traffic.
Audio courtesy of ABC7 and Pix 11. Federal agents searched 2 properties owned by a top advisor to New York City Mayor Eric Adams. The FBI carried out raids yesterday at 2 Bronx addresses, which records show are owned by Winnie Greco, a former fundraiser for Adams, who now serves as his director of Asian Affairs. The purpose of the investigation not revealed. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg, Nathan.
All right, Michael, thank you. Time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update, brought to you by Tri-State Audi. Good morning, John Stashower.
Good morning, Nathan. Steph Curry's been coming into the Garden for 15 years. Every time he does, Knicks fans can't help but think back to that 2009 draft. Knicks had the 8th pick. We're hoping to take Curry. Golden State took him with the 7th. He's gone on to make the most three-pointers ever, win 4 championships. Curry had it going at MSG last night.
Step back, left wing 3 over Achua. Perfecto! 53-44. And Steph with his 4th 3 of the game. He's got 17. Lead back to 9. 1:07 to go in the first half. Bounce pass, Draymond goes to Paul. Off a screen, Steph catch and shoot, right wing, 3 is good! His 8th of the game, he's got 31.
95-7, the Fan, Curry, and the Warriors never trailed, beat the Knicks 110-99. Golden State's now won 10 of the last 12. The injury-riddled Knicks have lost 8 of the last 11. At Barclays, rare, easy win for the Nets, up 18 in the first quarter. They beat Atlanta 124-97. Cam Johnson scored 29. The Wizards' 50th loss, 13th in a row. Took the Lakers to overtime, fell short. Anthony Davis scored 40 for L.A. Celtics will host Dallas tonight. 35-year-old Jeff Peterson, who's been the Nets' assistant GM, named to head up basketball operations in Charlotte. The Islanders went to Detroit and to the Red Wings. 6-game winning streak, 5-3, 2 goals for Brock Nelson. The Bruins blew a 3-0 lead, still beat Vegas 5-4. College hoops, Rutgers by 30 over Michigan. In Iowa, Caitlin Clark announced she's going pro when the season ends. Hardly a surprise. She's played 4 years, did have a year of eligibility left due to COVID. Clark already the leading scorer in NCAA and all of women's basketball history and about to go past Pete Maravich and have the most points, men or women. She'll almost certainly be taken first overall by Indiana in the WNBA draft. Yankees and Marlins played an exhibition game in Tampa. The game ended scoreless. John Stashower, Bloomberg Sports. Nathan?
Thank you, John. Now let's get right back to this market. Closing out the week, entering a new trading month with the S&P 500 and NASDAQ 100, both at all-time highs. So what should we be awaiting as we round out the quarter? Let's bring in Daniel Morris, Chief Market Strategist at BNP Paribas. Daniel, thanks for being with us. Does this market look toppy to you? Does the rally have more to go? Where do you see the momentum?
Well, certainly one thing you would be looking at if you were trying to make that assessment is valuations, given the run that we've had. But I think the encouraging news is that certainly valuations are higher than average, but given the earnings growth that we've seen, given the strength of U.S. economic growth that we've had, seems perfectly reasonable, and certainly compared to other parts of the world. Europe is struggling. Japan was in recession in the last quarter. The latest China data was disappointing. So you kind of running out of growth areas, and so you turn to the U.S., and that's reflected in the markets.
Are those valuations looking good to you across the market, or is it just in those AI stocks that we focus so much on these days?
Well, it's not the only. Perhaps the interesting comparison is if you take, say, NASDAQ 100 and look at multiples relative to history for the NASDAQ, and then do the same thing, say, for the Russell 1000 value. It's kind of the other part of the market, if you will. And they're both at about the same relative valuations, meaning they're both a bit above average, not terrible. And that's actually a big change from the environment we've had in previous years, where when you would say the S&P was expensive, you were really saying that tech stocks were expensive and everything else perhaps was cheap. So that's not the case anymore. Everything is kind of equally above average. But again, that goes back as a reflection of the growth and the earnings potential we think we see.
What did you make of the reaction that we saw after the core PCE deflator, the Fed's preferred inflation gauge, came in hotter, but right in line with estimates? We're starting to hear more Fed officials saying that maybe we can start thinking about rate cuts, even with this little bump in inflation.
We may be premature to go quite that far. I mean, certainly we had the chance to adjust our expectations after the CPI data, so it really should not have been another surprise, given it's just another slice at the same underlying dynamic. It is going to be, and you hate to say this, but a wait and see whether or not next month's data confirms the trend, because we saw it wasn't just housing in both the PC and the CPI data. There was services pressure, so we need to see if that persists. And to make you a little bit more cautious about whether it might or might not, you look at the data that we got out of Europe recently showed a similar surprise, particularly on the services side. So this scenario where inflation re-accelerates simply because growth is so strong, certainly not something we exclude entirely.
So are you thinking that caution's in order as we get ready for the next read on jobs next week?
Well, I think you would anticipate the jobs data is going to be fine. I mean, labor market in general is a lagging indicator. We have GDP for the fourth quarter was strong. GDP now forecasts around 3% for the first quarter. I mean, just really these just amazingly strong numbers given how high policy rates are. So that's all going to be fine. And I think the reason that you've seen this, rather, I guess, a benign positive reaction in equity markets because a bit more growth, a bit more inflation, that's certainly not much of a worry as far as equities are concerned.
So what's going to come into play in March for you? What catalysts are you looking at?
Well, you're looking, it's the same two risks to growth and in inflation. So, do we start to see a deceleration in growth? Certainly not yet, but at some point, it has to happen, if you will. And then on the inflation front, a bit high, a bit steady, not decelerating so much. That's probably not as big a concern. If you really did see that re-acceleration in inflation, you're going to start to question even the 3 cuts that the Fed has put out there.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Today, your morning brief on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed at 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, and Bloomberg 960 in San Francisco.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, SiriusXM, the iHeartRadio app, and on Bloomberg.com. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.